Jason. Today's episode of the Lee's Summit Town Hall podcast is brought to the good people by Budget Blinds of Lee's Summit.
Budget Blinds!
Jason, our friends at Budget Blinds of Lee's Summit, they are the home of Signature Series shades.
All hail those robot shade overlords.
That is the place to go if you are ready to turn your home into a smart home. It's going to help you save money. It's going to maybe help you save a life because they're the safe choice for your shades.
You can add the safety. You can bring the energy efficiency. You got your signature shades. Oh, boy, those are hard. It's a hard word to say. It's like a tongue twister in the middle of this ad. Signature Series shades at Budget Blinds of Lee's Summit.
So if you are ready to make this your next stay-at-home project for your house, go see our friends at Budget Blinds right in the heart of downtown. Tell them Jason Nick sent you. Hello and welcome to this Friday episode of the Lee's Summit Town Hall podcast. I am Nick Parker, and joining me again on a Friday, he's back, Jason Norbury.
I'm here. I'm always so very excited to be here on your Friday show, mostly
Jason,
because I think it annoys you.
It really does, and I am happy to report that I think for a good long while, this is the last one. Our extra innings game of election season is finally over.
Well, I mean, look, we haven't had the election yet, so who knows?
This is true. Don't. Let's not go there. Look, it's 60 days too late, or abouts. But on Tuesday, June 2nd, we can finally hold the municipal election.
Does this mean like that Rob Binney is like the longest serving city council person in the term limit era?
Yeah, I think so.
Because he got this extra 60 days?
Now, because it's the term limited era, does that mean that there is an asterisk in the record books?
Probably. I mean, it's kind of like the anti-steroid era, but it's like the reverse of that. But yeah, I think it's
maybe he was juicing the dice. I don't know. Some of those votes came a little strong. He threw those votes a little far.
He did. And that extra 60 days of electoral stamina, clearly he's been juicing. So Rob Binney, you can put down the stanozolol or the anabolic steroids, and you can taper. You can taper down. You can taper down. You're not a young man anymore. It's time to move on to the next phase of your life.
Wow, we had a lot of jokes there, but then you just threw in the not a young man. Wow.
I did.
Councilman Benny, you know where Jason lives if you want to go after him.
And another thing to Councilman Faith, who had announced he wasn't going to run but had to serve for an extra 2 months anyway. Thank you for the time you spent on the council. Thank you for the vote on the downtown apartment complex. And we appreciate your time serving the community. Thank you.
Wow. I think we should throw the thank you to Benny as well.
Oh, well, no, definitely. Absolutely a thank you to Rob Binney. He has been a source of insight for us over the course of time. He's been on the podcast a couple of different times, always willing to come and talk to us when we have issues that we want to chitter about. And he as well for even longer.
And that thank you also includes my texts and emails that say, hey, I don't understand this. Help explain it to me so that I can go try to explain it to other people on the podcast.
Absolutely. So
he's always been willing to be that guy, and really he has been a good friend of the podcast, and we appreciate all of the work not only he did to help us out, but also what he's done for the city.
Absolutely. He's been I would say safely to say he's been a good friend to Lee's Summit as well.
Well, Jason, let's get into it. This is our final election wrap-up, little preview. We have, for the last few weeks, we've been resharing our interviews with the candidates. Those were interesting to do. All of them were done
in the before times,
pre-lockdown, except for District 4 candidate Donnie Funk, who we did his via video conference. Actually, Steve Lee in District 2. He was also done late, but it was interesting. And so we're going to talk about on the second half of our show, we're going to talk a little bit about the individual candidates for city council and for Board of Education. But one of the things we're going to talk about is all those conversations that we had with them happened before lockdown. So the budget question has changed a little bit, and there's going to be, I think, a different way for us to look at their answers.
Absolutely. And I think that, look, the before times, and it was literally, it's like 80 days ago.
I want to redefine BC.
Yeah.
We're going to redefine what BC means when we talk about time, and it's now
Before quarantine? No,
before
that doesn't start with C. Before Corona.
I thought you were the smart one on the show.
Like, it's late in the week. I'm not used to this. I do not have. Maybe I need to get some of Rob Binney's legislative steroids to get me through this podcast, the second podcast this week. But we're gonna tough through it. I'm gonna suck it up and give one for the team.
All right. Well, before we get and we go back and talking about the candidates, the two things we haven't revisited as we've done for the last few weeks to get ready for this extended election day is we have not revisited the use tax question for the city, and on Wednesday we did replay our interview with Board of Education Vice Chair Ryan Murdoch, where we talked a little bit about the bond issue. So I want to talk, Jason, a little about those two things. Let's talk with the use tax question that's on the ballot, and let's just start off like we usually do on that. Jason, put on the boring attorney hat. Look at the language. And please try not to talk like an attorney. Just give us the quick lowdown. What the heck is this thing?
Actually, I will say this. So I'll start with that I actually opened up for the first time, and I'm going to estimate 12 to 15 years, my Black's Law Dictionary, just to look up what the definition of use tax was from a sort of a legal standpoint. And it's very, very simple definition. It is a sales tax that is collectible by the seller or the purchaser domiciled in a different state. And so what that means is in the era of Amazon and online purchasing, a significant percentage of sales, according to the city's website, 11% of total sales were done on the internet and not subject to sales taxes that you pay when you go downtown and buy a couch from Cameron's or a t-shirt at Fossil 4 or Local Foundry or wherever you shop locally. You end up paying a sales tax here and that's collectible in the state and payable in the state. But when you go on to an online retailer and you purchase something to be delivered, you do not pay a local sales tax for that. Over the last several years, Amazon and some of the other major retailers have logged on and done state-level taxes. Those have come on, and then more recently, there have been local, what are called use taxes. And it's a sales tax. It's just that the seller and the purchaser are in different states. That's right. The basic gist.
But Jason, I like shopping online because it means I don't always have to pay the tax.
This is true. But think of it this way. That puts a local retailer at a disadvantage to an online retailer, and you deal with that sort of thing. So by doing that, by a purchase that you would normally have made at a local retailer, whether it be a very small retailer like the ones I've mentioned, or even the largest of retailers like Walmart, pay those things. If you purchase it here in the city, you pay that tax and it goes into the city funds and is used to support the things that the city does. So those, police, fire, road improvements, stormwater, parks, all of those sorts of things collect those taxes and get paid for those sorts of things. So really what we're doing here, or what the city is proposing to do in this ballot issue, is bring the online retailers into parity with local retailers so that it takes away that incentive to purchase just to save what will be 2% on, or 2.25% on a purchase.
Well, and let's say too, this was brought up because the city, BC, was already looking at an expected shortfall in revenue in the coming years.
Right. We have seen those charts multiple times over the last couple
right.
years.
So if I am a voter, which I am, but for voters, should they think about, well, if the city was already looking at tax revenues going down, now we've just gone through 80 days basically of our businesses being closed for the most part.
Mm-hmm. That's basically a quarter of the year.
A quarter of the year has now been of tax revenues to the city has been decimated. Is this something voters should consider when they're looking at this use tax and going, maybe this is an extra 2%, which, by the way, is a drop in the city's bucket? right? This is not going to be a huge windfall for the city.
Right. Their
This
estimate.
is a small portion
Right.
of the budget. But is this something voters should consider, that, you know what, it's already going to be hard enough for the city to have the revenue to provide all these services that I am used to as a resident of Lee Summit?
I think it does.
Is that fair of me to draw that?
That's politics. It's all fair.
I'm not trying to play politics. I'm just trying to think of the things that voters that we ought to think about as we go to a poll.
I think, well, I mean, I think you could look, go back in the BC, in the before times, right? BC, and our new phrase for the podcast. And you look at the projections of revenue and expenses over time without some sort of adjustment. And it had that this process was already going to happen. The city was going to experience shortfalls and would either have to find additional revenue or reduce expenses, which typically means reducing some city services somewhere. That's only, and so if that is a factor that people should have been weighing to begin with, and I think it's only exacerbated by this time. And I think that people may, and look, not only may it affect the way they vote, it may affect their purchasing habits, right? I mean, I know I personally, I'm not wanting to go out very much right now, but to the extent we can, we go, we try to still buy things locally, either get them delivered or we go pick them up curbside or whatever the case may be. But you want to support those local businesses because they're the ones that plow that money, not only the sales taxes, but their employees and the business owners and the property owners. When they flourish, that money churns through the local economy in ways, not just to fund the city government, but in the overall scheme of things. So, maybe it's already affecting people's purchasing decisions, and it should be a factor that they pay attention to. And I would say that at this point, anything helps. But there are always people, when you propose increasing a tax revenue, who are going to stand in opposition to that. And I don't know that it's by itself persuasive.
Okay, well, I think that's a good little last look into what the use tax is, and a couple things maybe to consider as you head toward the polls on Tuesday to make your decision. I'm gonna make a short kind of inserted break here. As I say, as you head to the polls, make sure you go to the Jackson County Election Board website or check your mail from the last several days. Your polling location has likely changed. So make sure you go look up where your polling location is so that you go to the right place to cast your vote. Jason, let's move on. Let's go to the R7 bond issue. Like I said, on Wednesday we replayed our conversation with Ryan Murdoch from the R7 Board of Education. Let's talk a little bit about what that bond issue is. Let's review that first, and then I want to ask you a little bit about process, our favorite thing.
Okay. Well, it's a big bond issue. I mean, let's not
that might be the understatement of our show.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big bond issue, and that's okay. I mean, on its own standpoints, I think what you're looking at there is it's designed to do a lot of things. It's got a lot of stuff coming into it.
The highlights are, I think the big things that are on people's minds are it's a new middle school. It's adding a fourth middle school to the district. It's moving it is setting up to move sixth grade out of elementary schools and into the middle schools. And then it allows some other changes around the district. Early childhood stuff will expand. We'll move to another building. We're talking a lot of safety and security additions and changes throughout many of the buildings. There are some changes to the athletics and those facilities. So this is a huge thing.
All right. Don't forget a big upgrade to Lee Summit High School,
yes.
Our oldest high school, which is in need of some things for not only for just modernization, but also being upgraded for safety and security of the students on the campus.
Well, that's the word there, on the campus. It will finally become an enclosed campus.
Right.
If this passes, that's one of the big things. Which for others, people who have grown up the last 30 years around here, there used to be a neighboring city had a similar multi-building campus that is now enclosed for safety and security reasons.
So there we go. So those are the things that are on the ballot. And all of those things are things that came out of the comprehensive facilities master plan process
C
they went through.
F M P.
MP, and they went through that whole
For new
process.
listeners, that's a running joke of me getting it wrong.
Yes, there were two phases of that. Then it went to the school board, and I mean, it was very, very. There's been a lot of input on it, both public and at the school board level, that they came out and they made this ask, knowing what they were asking for when they did that.
Let's talk a little bit about considerations as you go to the ballot box on that one. And I think the two biggest questions, Jason, that we've heard from people in the community. One is, after the last 18, well, okay, I forget that it's now been 3 months of shutdown, so we have to stretch it even further. But basically the last 2 years, a lot of people aren't sure they trust the district and the people running the district and the school board in particular to spend this kind of money in the most responsible way. And then the other thing we've heard is that there are a lot of people who think maybe we shouldn't be talking about buildings. We should be talking about finding money to increase salaries for teachers, to make sure that we have the right administrators in the right places. What do you think are some of the answers to those, or how have you heard some of the board members answer and respond to those questions?
Well, I don't think anyone's ever really, I want to say, credibly challenged the school board's financial management. I don't think that's ever been an issue. There's been a lot of interpersonal rancor on the dais that we've seen, a couple rounds of that over the last 4 years. There's been there's a lot of disagreement in the district, amongst the parents, amongst the staff and the faculty and all that about, what equity looks like, what should it look like, how it should be implemented, all those sorts of things. We've had a lot of disagreements, but I don't think anybody argues, even for a second, that I've heard or seen or any evidence of, that the district is mismanaged in some way. Maybe the priorities aren't where they should be, but that's more a function of who's on the board and who's the superintendent than it is, that the money is being misspent or wasted or unaccounted in any way of that regard. So that's sort of the first part of that budget. The second part, I think we've seen a little of this, and not a lot, is that people are indicating, like, if you vote no, that your property taxes are going to go down. And that's not correct. This is a no tax increase bond, so it's not really a change. There's no change in the levy rate on your home for the property taxes that we pay to support the school district. And a no vote is not going to have a material impact on what that is in the near future. The money just, it's not going to generate new money or change. It's going to fiddle things, but it's longer down the road. It's not an immediate impact on that. As for teacher salaries, Nick, how do you feel about teacher salaries?
Well, look, I think they all should be paid 6 figures minimum.
Absolutely. And you have no personal vested stake in that at all. No. All right. So
no, look, that's fine. And obviously being married to a teacher, although outside this district, and being raised by a teacher, yes, they should ask for more money. They should get more money. However, they don't come from the same buckets. A bond issue can only be spent on physical projects like what we're talking about here, which is construction and things like that. So
capital expenditures.
So a vote no on this does not mean there will be more money available for salaries, for people, for the human resource. So that's a great conversation to have, and we should absolutely have that conversation about our teachers in our district. Are their salaries and wages, are they competitive with other districts in the area? Do they need to be higher than other districts in the area? Because, hey, we're Lee Summit, we're awesome.
All right. Are we spending enough of the operating revenue that our district makes on teacher salaries, or are the percentages that we are doing that off?
That is absolutely a valid and righteous debate and conversation to have, but it's not the same conversation as this one, which is are these needed projects, are these necessary projects to help not only make our school district better, but to keep it aligned with the current goals that we have set as a district?
That is a question.
And that's the thing that the voters really need to think about. I think making it about trusting the district's board of education to handle that is kind of a distraction. I think making the conversation about teacher salaries is a distraction as well, because those are separate things. And despite all of the consternation that the district's been through, none of that has really been about the finances and the way they've spent their money.
Right. And you and
they're just separate conversations.
Right. And you and I have been highly critical of the school district over the last year and change, as they, I'm going to say, handled the separation from Dr. Carpenter. However, credit where credit is due. I think that the facilities master plan process was actually very good. There were like 24 different public engagement opportunities throughout the course of that process with all kinds of different interest groups, ranging from, parents to students to faculty to staff to administration to the business community to you name it. Everybody got opportunity not only to be on the planning committee, but also just to engage with the work that was going on. And so really, I think it was a very good process that was done. So credit to the school district for that.
As someone who spent a few minutes in the world of public participation with municipalities and districts, they're not always as inclusive as this process was. So I'm just going to say, in comparison to some of the things that I've seen, that I've covered, or that I've even been a part of those processes, this was a pretty deep and inclusive process that included people throughout the community, whether it was business leaders, whether it was residents, whether it was parents, current and former staff and teachers. So this was a pretty in-depth process, and this was the recommendation that came out of it. I think it's a ton of money. That's a lot of money to think about. And so if you have reservations, that's good. I just want to make sure that everybody is considering the right things as they go to the ballot box and decide whether or not they want to support this big ask.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think you're right on, and that's what we try to do with things like, what are the questions we want people that we think are really germane to what we're dealing with. There are going, like I said before, on the use tax issue, there are always a subset of our population who's going to vote no on any taxation thing at all. One, I'm not talking to those people as a whole, and they're probably not listening to us anyway. But I mean, so that's a strongly held opinion that is inflexible in its nature, and is not one that we're really. But if you're trying to parse out, like, what are the things we need to look at, don't get distracted by some of the shiny stuff on one side or another. Think about those. Trying to stay focused on those key factors, and don't let tangential issues distract you from the core stuff that you can make a decision.
And if you haven't,
whether you want to vote for it or not.
And if you haven't, I would encourage you to go listen to the conversation we had with Ryan Murdoch. And obviously, very obviously, as a member of that Board of Education, he is in favor. He is speaking in favor of the bond issue. But I think he did a pretty good job of laying out each of those projects and kind of what they meant. Obviously, he was supporting, but I think it was in a way too that, as a listener and as a voter, you can look at those and you can make your decision whether or not you think those are valid projects for the district to be asking for.
See, now we've proven twice that we can say nice things about the school board.
There we go. We've done it. Hey, that's going to wrap up our first half of the episode. We're going to take a short break and hear from one of our sponsors, and then we are going to be back, and we're going to talk a little bit, Jason, about the candidates.
Hi, I'm Jane Monroe, owner of Embrace the Grape and District 4 resident. Donnie Funk has my vote for City Council, and here's why. Donnie's time serving on the Planning Commission, his experience in the construction industry, and his work as a small business owner has given him the insight we need on City Council. This means that Donnie knows the questions to ask to get accountability for our tax dollars. Donnie Funk is a strong advocate for public safety and will work to ensure police and firefighters, along with all city employees, are well cared for. Join me in voting Funk for 4.
All right, Jason, well, let's shift over our conversation to candidates. Let's talk about the candidates. I want to start with the LSR7 Board of Education. There are 3 spots available, 9 candidates. Man, I remember, Jason, times when trying to get enough people to run was a hard
or
thing.
you only had the 3 incumbents running for re-election, and there was no election.
Right.
That wasn't long ago. That was just 3 or 4 years ago when we were doing that.
And now there are 9 candidates for 3 spots, and only one of those 9 is an incumbent. That is Kim Fritchie. Our other candidates are Kathy Campbell, Megan Marshall, Christine Bushyhead, Dr. Matt Newald, Larry Anderson, Dr. David Thompson, Mark Leach, and Brian Osterman. Those are your candidates for the R7 Board of Education. We had each of those candidates on our show. We
unlike some races we're going to discuss,
right.
All of the candidates came and talked to us.
Unlike the city council, when all candidates and the Board of Education, we're willing to talk and willing to answer questions. And Jason, we joke that there's a lot of softballs when we do those, and especially that we had to do to get everyone in, we had to do 3 candidates at a time. But I think we asked them. We were able to push each of them a little bit on a few things. We did talk to them a lot about budget and their thoughts going into that. Those questions have changed a little bit, I think, since the lockdown and the current trend of the economy. I think that it's going to be a more difficult thing for them to answer in the future. But Jason,
well, and you've got several of the candidates had and discussed, and I think they all did to a certain extent, talked about what does the future of education look like? And none of them, and look, to be honest, none of us thought about, well, what happens if we can't go into the buildings anymore
right.
or for a long time? And there is, I know all of the plans are going where they're going and all this, but there is still a very, very real possibility that we're going to begin the 2020-2021 school year virtually again. And that's a thing that they're going to have to think about, and that's going to cause just a whole mess of allocation of reallocation of resources. And Lee Summit is really pretty well prepared with that. But they've got one, every student has their own laptop and all those things. But it's been hard on the students. It's been incredibly hard on the teachers.
Well, and that conversation, Jason, is going to be the first thing that they are as new board members. That's going to be the first thing that they're going to have to tackle, because the state and the district are already saying, look, we're not going to be ready to even talk about decisions, to get close to decisions until July at the earliest. So that's it. That's going to be the first big thing right in front of their faces when this new board sits down for their first meeting. So that's
good. It's good that they'll be able to ease in really
right. Nothing like, hey, look, we don't need you to jump into the fire or anything. No hard decisions at first.
Yeah. Well, look, you put your name on that ballot and you've signed up for whatever comes your way.
You raised your hand to serve. Congratulations.
Here's a pandemic. and do that.
Jason, so let's talk a little bit though, Jason, I'm curious, and this is a little bit unfair of me because those conversations were 2 months ago.
And that was BC.
What did you hear? What kind of stood out from those conversations, as with the exception of the things surrounding the pandemic? What stood out to you among all of those candidates as issues they all thought were going to be things they had to tackle?
I think that, in large part, to me, the conversations, we made a point to talk about the equity plan and how that was going forth. And there were some differences in how they would go about dealing with those. And we pushed on virtually every candidate. And I thought some of them had some interesting answers. And I thought, Kim Fritchie's answer was unique, obviously, because she was sort of going through that process from the inside, and it was kind of an insightful answer on that sort of thing. But I think that they had some different visions a little bit here and there about where education is going and how we're going to kind of adapt what we're doing. How are the buildings changing? How does curricula change? How do the teachers change? What are we dealing with? And to me, that was interesting, and I think it was a point where there was a little bit more differentiation amongst the candidates than you might get on a lot of the other issues that, look, they were all in favor of the bond issue. They're all going to claim they're pro-teacher, and they're all, none of them were running for the school board on the, no, we pay those teachers too darn much as a
I'm not sure if that's a good way to get elected.
No, it's a good way to get the teachers mad at you. But beyond that, so I think that's one of those areas where we were getting into, and like, what is this going to look like? What are these issues coming up? I think the other big one is the relationship with Dr. Buck.
I think that stood out to me. I think a lot of them really came ready to talk about really what had happened the previous 18, 24 months, and they were ready to talk about how the board should conduct themselves and how they should work with each other and how they should work with the new superintendent, Dr. Buck, who will start his job officially in July. Hey, welcome.
Well, he's already been on like Facebook Live stuff and other things with the district talking about the bond issue and things of that nature. So he's already been there.
It was interesting that they were all, I think that's the thing that's been on at probably every voter's mind, every candidate's mind is we watched a very dysfunctional board in that whole thing surrounding the equity plan, surrounding Dr. Carpenter. And I think they were all ready to talk about it. And even the incumbent, Kim Fritchie, was ready to talk about it, and she was pretty open about what she felt she'd learned about those processes and how they were going to work going forward. And I think that's an important thing, because really there are only a few jobs that the board does, right? And that's hire the superintendent, that's approve the budget, and then that's hold the superintendent and his administration accountable going forward as they make the mission happen. So,
and I'm going to say this: that last one, the hold accountable, that relationship, because that accountability goes both ways, and it can be done in a lot of different ways. But the board, in various iterations, to be clear, has not done a good job of that with both of the last two superintendents. And
I would say that's an issue that people should pay
this.
attention to. That, to me, is the thing that if when you go and you listen to our conversations with them, if you're listening to conversations that they had with other groups around the community, and which there were more candidate forums, I think, this year, or at least planned. Almost everybody had to go virtual, but there were more of those, I think, than we've seen in previous years. But that's the issue I think you ought to pay attention to as you're picking the 3 of 9 that for your choices is, how are they going to approach that role of accountability, and how are they going to approach communication with their constituents? Those are the 2 things that were really, I think, sorely lacking in the last few years. And so when you're looking at putting new members on the board or reelecting, look at how they responded to those questions and what they think their plans are to improve those areas.
Absolutely. And then, think about how, your understanding of where things were and how things are going, and where you want that to be. Do you want a little bit more of an assertive board that kind of really holds the superintendent more tightly to account, or do you want a board maybe that steps back a little bit? There was a lot of conversation in the various forums about, how much get along should the board have, and people were discussing those sorts of issues as well. So those things, how the board interacts with each other and how they interact with the administration, are really key things. And there's some differences in the candidates, and how you think that should be is going to have an impact on how you should vote.
Now we're going to flip over to city council and the candidates there. And this is a different conversation, Jason, because publicly, the public-facing part of it, there has been none of that kind of on the dais drama from the city council that we had seen from previous city councils or from the Board of Education. I think the focus is, obviously, focus again will be on budget and the expected giant budget shortfalls, but it's also going to be on development, and it's going to be on communication with the constituents, which is a continuing thing that every election, you and I harp on it. We have listeners and readers and people throughout the community. Everybody wants better communication. And
yes,
you mentioned it before. Every candidate for the Board of Education came on and talked to us. 2 incumbents for the city council did not even respond to information. So that's a thing right there. But as you go through and listen, I think that the three things that are really the big issues are, again, going to be how do they approach the budget, and then how are they looking at development, the future development of the community. That includes incentives and how those packages work to lure in new developments, and then how are they going to communicate with their constituents to make sure that they are best representing the people in their districts.
Absolutely. And, I mean, as we have talked about, even we had really one candidate that we really talked to after the sort of the lockdown really had started to be in place. And even then, we weren't, I think, cognizant of how disruptive
it was new.
the next 2 months, or however long this is going to continue, was going to be. People maybe were thinking, oh, we'll just be a couple of weeks or whatever, and we just didn't know the scale and the scope of the change and the disruption that we've had in our community. And I will say that the city is far more dependent on sales taxes and revenue that is sort of economic, based on even the economic engine, than like the school board is. Because property taxes, unless we have a significant real estate crash, property taxes are going to be kind of what they are, and they'll go up or not as the market shifts around. But sales tax revenue is low, and we hit on this a little bit earlier, and I'll have you. And so it's going to have an impact not only on like how the city does its business. I mean, so as we're recording this on Thursday night, I'd had planning commission earlier, and it was our second or third planning commission with on video conference, and we, one of the city attorney staff came on and said, the next one, whatever the plans are, the next one we have scheduled is going to be by video conference, and then we'll make decisions going forward. So once again, it's possible we'll be having virtual city councils for months as we go through this process, just depending on how COVID progresses through our community.
And that's where I think it's important as a voter to, whether you're listening to interviews and conversations that the candidates had, or material that the candidates have put out. Almost all of that was done before times, as you like to say. But you can still look at their approach to the budget issues, at their approach to the development and incentive processes, and look at how they grasp those issues and how they think they could make things work for the betterment of the city, because that's going to give you an idea of how they address it in this even harder time, in this more difficult time of increasing revenue for the city, of making decisions that are going to be, can we not only improve the services the city provides to us, the residents, but can they maintain the services the city provides? Those are going to be hard questions, and you really, I think, need to listen to how they respond to those questions and their approaches to make sure that you're picking the right person.
Right, and I don't think we ran into this too much in the interviews that we did, but if you're looking at a candidate who's extremely dogmatic and inflexible, this may not be the best time to have an inflexibility. And when you're talking about how do they approach it, do they have a flexible thing? Is it in the best interest of the city? And I don't have an answer to this question. Is it in the best interest of the city for our development, our incentive policy to be more strictly applied? So we maybe give out fewer incentives in the next year or two, because we need the budget. We don't want to take the budget hit. Or perhaps is the better answer to really incentivize some development to get that extra whatever we can get in there for the knock-on effects that it has on our economy. Minds are going to differ on that, but the answer is not the same as it was in the before times. And we can, it's not necessarily the same answer that you have. So are the people's, the way they approach it, the way they go through that, are they flexible enough to adapt to this radically different situation that we have today than we had merely 3 months ago?
A lot of every election, the kind of cliche thing is there's not a more important time to make the decision now, right? That's kind of the cliche statement of every election season. I'm going to change it a little bit. This might be one of the hardest times to make a decision as a voter, because you're really looking to pick leaders who to get us through a time that none of us really know.
Yeah, and look,
There's
as a guy,
so many unknowns.
I'm a guy who likes to think he knows some stuff, and I am astonished at the things I can't even start to figure out right now. I mean, it's all new, it's all confusing, it's all difficult to even guess what we're dealing with. We just don't know. If we're building a budget today, we're building it on assumptions that may or may not be applicable in August and again in December. And so the amount of change that we're going to be dealing with on every front, but in the city government and in the school board and our school administration is going to be important, and the ability to deal with that, I think, is paramount to what we're dealing with coming forward.
Well, as we round out this part of the show and this discussion, I'm going to run through and let everybody know once again who their candidates are. For District 1 City Council, you have Hillary Shields, Steve Lambert, and Robert Dye. In District 2, your candidates are Timothy Shrout, Andrew Felker, Roberta Goff, and Steve Lee. In District 3, you have Phyllis Edson and Dr. Rocco Florio. And in District 4, my old stomping grounds, you have Fred DeMauro and Donnie Funk as your two candidates for District 4 City Council. Jason, that's going to wrap us up for this week. Hopefully, last time I'm going to have you on a Friday for a long time. I want my Friday show back, man.
I'm totally Zoom bombing every Friday interview you do here forward.
You know what? I got to tell you, I've only been able to do a couple since the lockdown started, and because we were mostly playing election stuff. I miss my Friday conversations. I'm ready to get my fun interviews back.
You better do. Well, there's your call, right? We're going to call out to everybody now. If you think you are or know someone who'd be a good interview for Nick to interview on Friday and for me to Zoom bomb, by all means, you need to send us email or Facebook or any of the other ways you connect so that Nick knows who to go talk to.
I want some new good stories. So send me people. If you've got a good story, if you know a friend, neighbor, whatever, with a good Lee Summit story, let me know. I want to tell it. That will do it for this week. We will talk to everybody on Monday.